Hi, so this is Dorote Lucci, and I wanted to do my presentation for meditation and neuroscience class. So this is the PowerPoint presentation, and I did a study on gamma waves for this. And I wanted to start with a general introduction to brain waves. So scientists are studying how oscillations generated by nerve cells affect brain function. And although these boundaries between different wave types can be fuzzy because they interact and they don't seem to be absolutely separate, these oscillations in general can be grouped by frequency. So these would be the brain waves. We have the delta brain waves that are for deep sleep, relaxation. And then we have light sleep and deep meditative states that are usually characteristic of theta waves. And we have alpha waves that are more about relaxed alertness and a light meditative state. And then active vigilant state would be the beta waves. And this increased intense neuronal activity and hypervigilance, but I would also say probably connectivity, seems to be in the range of the gamma waves. And I have also seen that the gamma waves seem to be qualified between 30 hertz and sometimes 200 hertz even, but here they were stated from 30 to 100 hertz. So that seems to vary on what type of gamma waves are spoken about. So brain waves are produced by synchronized electrical pulses from masses of neurons communicating with each other. And these brain waves are then detected using sensors that are placed on the scalp or within the scalp, as they would do with mice and rats, I believe, for research purposes. And they are divided into these bandwidths that we already mentioned. Another comment that resonated for me around the brain waves is that these different frequencies seem to function like a symphony, and the higher and lower frequencies link and cohere with each other through harmonics. So I thought that was a great way of describing the brainwave activity. So when slower brain waves, as we saw, when slower brain waves are dominant, you can feel tired or more relaxed or slow, sluggish, or dreamish, or in an intense meditative state. And the higher frequencies are dominant when we feel wired or hyper alert. And these brain waves are measured in hertz, which is what is underneath. That is hertz or cycles per second. And they are then divided into bands, delineating slow, moderate, and fast waves, which we can see over here in the brainwave chart, what all of these brainwaves look like. And the gamma wave is distinctly different, much shorter, much more squiggly. So the gamma brainwaves are the fastest of all the brainwaves. High frequency, so in that analogy of a symphony, they would be like a flute, and they relate to simultaneous processing of information from different brain areas. So gamma brain waves pass information, it seems, rapidly and quietly, and they're also the most subtle of brainwave frequencies. And apparently, too, that the mind has to be quiet to access gamma, which I find interesting. And these gamma waves were dismissed as spare brain noise for quite a while, until researchers discovered that it was highly active when in states of universal things like compassion, love, altruism, or what we call the higher values. It's also about the frequency of neuronal firing. So how they're generated seems to be a bit of a mystery, although from some of the other research that I read, it has been found exactly how they're generated, where, and how they connect to other brain waves. But I'll go into that later. It is speculated that gamma rhythms modulate perception and consciousness, and that a greater presence of gamma relates to expanded consciousness. And we'll also see a little bit more about that later. So the brainwaves are called neuronal oscillations, and the signals are known to accompany then certain states, certain mental states. Within that, what I found interesting was that large-scale electrical recordings of the human limbic system have revealed an amygdala HPC subnetwork. And this is relating to mood and brain waves, so that there's a change in the brain waves according to the different emotions passing through, and a specific spatiotemporal neural signature that encodes a large portion of the variation in mood over time. So this is particularly interesting when looking at individuals with elevated anxiety, because that seems to be quite clear how then mood and brain waves are synchronized or seem to move together, or are expressed. So maybe the mood is expressed by the brain waves, and the brain waves precede the mood. So these are thought to reflect distinct aspects of neural function and cognitive processing. So again, here we have the different brainwave hertz, and I noticed like everybody seems to be using different term bandwidth for gamma. Here it's 30 to 70 hertz in this research. So I'm not so sure about that. Brainwave frequency, here again, it's a little bit different. There they peg gamma at 30 to 200 hertz. So this is interesting because it's a beautiful graph about decoding the different brain waves. And we see gamma here, and they come from all brain structures, retina and olfactory bulbs. So that is also interesting. So that goes back to the discussion about visual perception. And I guess the sense of smell is also affected by gamma. So that is very interesting. Perception, it affects perception, attention, memory, awareness, and neural connections. And it is also interesting that perception seems to be something that pops up in the different brain waves. So beta and theta apparently are also grouped within perception, which makes sense. And then alpha is, however, focused on attention, although beta would be too. So it's progressive, and I just thought this was a nice way of dividing it up to understand how it is more of a symphony, how they act and sort of almost melt together at times, and other times they're clearly distinct in their function and their effect. There's some studies going on about gamma waves and how subtle eye movement affects EEG gamma frequencies, which is interesting since before there was a lot of scientists who would dismiss gamma waves as being noise. So in this case, there's more research going on around exactly how subtle eye movements then affect the gamma frequencies and in the movement within that. So I guess the answer is gamma waves are not just an interference. So in terms of visual processing complexity and gamma waves, first of all, when you look at a scene, the first half of the time it takes to stare is spent on visual information streaming into your brain. So this is the upward loop. And toward the end of that fixation time, the information then flows in reverse because you've had a conscious visual perception, and then the information is analyzed. So this includes different types of waves, including gamma, I guess, and it also involves theta, surprisingly. So this would be an example of how these waves work in synchrony. So the low gamma band can be oscillating at 25 to 55 hertz and has been linked to visual consciousness or perception and awareness of visual stimulation. And it seems to promote associative learning and is also present during REM sleep. So not necessarily when we are looking at things on the outside world. So the visual consciousness then works differently. And slow wave sleep and deep sleep as well, which is really interesting. And so that would involve deep dreaming and complex visuals. So what I thought was interesting is just this play with the visuals. Up above, I included a picture of Carl Jung's book, The Red Book, and it just looks like some sort of an abstract of these types of connections and brain waves and functioning to me. I don't know, it felt really inspiring because things emerge out of this connectivity underneath it in different frequencies, but at the same time. And I also like the way the wavelength band is portrayed here with the colors, although not directly applicable to the gamma waves. So what is very interesting about the gamma waves is this these gamma waves at the time of death. So as the heart stopped, and this is an excerpt from Dr. Schlitz's book, Death Makes Life Possible. As the heart stopped and the blood stopped flowing and the blood pressure pretty much went to zero, this number dwindled down to about zero and the heart stopped. But then in 7 out of 7 cases that this person Chawla studied, there was a sudden burst of brain activity that turned out to be gamma synchrony. So again, referring back to gamma synchrony as a correlative consciousness, and that lasted anywhere from 90 seconds to 20 minutes in one case. So this then links to a fairly famous study by Borjigan from 2013, where after implanting 6 electrodes in the brain of 9 rats, she noticed a neurochemical spike in the rats' brains in the moment before their deaths. And then she became interested in what occurred in the brain at that particular moment. So there was a spike in gamma wave activity that was measured in the rats' brains immediately after cardiac arrest. And the researchers also noticed information transfer between neurons in the front and the back of the brain, which relates back to that first slide, to that loop of visual processing, of taking in visual information and processing it and then sending back into the area of the prefrontal cortex or mid-prefrontal cortex. So very, very interesting. And then they interpreted this activity as a possible sign that the rat brains were forming organized thoughts, which is what I was referring to, and that the near-death brain activity included different levels of consciousness and was even more complex than that of a normal brain, which refers back to this ability to have insight when this is happening. So when there's a higher activity like this, that may be one of the effects. So what Borjigin says is we weren't surprised that we found brain activity, but we were surprised by the high degree of it. So then we have brainwave oscillations as a choice. So that is also something I came across with when I was doing my research, was this idea of these brainwaves working together or syncing as like on and off. And it seems that there is an interaction between the gamma and beta waves, which is meant to resolve a problem of overload in the brain, meaning that when there is a lot of information flushing in, you need to pick what you focus on. And this would then be done with the beta and gamma wave interaction. So just to sink into that a little bit further, so it's the volitional control of what you think about. So allowing a person to consciously choose what information to bring to mind. And so it seems that the gamma waves perk up in power when sensory bottom-up information is loaded into and read out from working memory. So there's an integration happening here. And this is what this graph refers to, is this afferent information coming in. And it seems that the alpha beta rhythms carry top-down information about goals and plans within the cortex. So top-down information is what we use to make these volitional decisions about what we think about and how to act. So if these are then offset or mixed with the gamma rhythms, so when the gamma rhythms went up, the beta rhythms went down, and vice versa. So in other words, the beta rhythms are associated with this top down and with the information as to what the current goal is and how to achieve it and what the rules of the task are. But the gamma waves go up and bring in the information. So there is this, I guess, an open focus and a closed focus loop going on at the same time. So it gives one the choice of thought, and that is then expressed in the oscillation and in the ability to do this flexibly. And my guess is that the more flexible this then becomes, the more self-awareness is present in the person. So there was a study published from Miller's lab that would be in the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and Miller's lab found that beta waves are produced by deep layers of the prefrontal cortex, and gamma rhythms are produced by superficial layers which process sensory information. So the sensory information that comes up, so the whole body mind information is then processed together or intermixed in a symphonic way with the beta waves. So I think the difficulty in this, of course, is that it's an extremely complex system. So it's not so easy to just make sweeping generalizations. Another thing that was interesting that came up in my research was that the information of the brain is in its core is held in the signals that is zipped off by the neurons, and then these oscillations help those signals reach the right spot, connecting the brain areas in important ways. So that was just this front and back connection, for example. Or I assume also, if we're relating this to smell, how that would be interacted in the same way. So that the oscillations, then what they do is they provide a rooting mechanism. And then my question would be, the more often this happens, then there must be an element of neurogenesis as well. And I ran across some research speaking about biomarkers and the different Hertz points of biomarkers. And there's this biomarker number 4, sensory motor tasks, perception, binding, attention, working, and associative memory. So it seems like it's that sensory perception, but really body mind, that then is brought together in the gamma waves. And that brought me to Wilber's consciousness table, which is what this is, because then in turn, this means that as you can perceive things more flexibly work together, or your brain works these frequencies with more ease, or can switch from gamma and into interpretation with beta and then back to gamma, it would seem to me that then the self-awareness or the consciousness state is actually higher, which should be something that would be reflected physically. And that is in this table. And then because of this, I wanted to mention that that study of the Buddhist monks that had that was super interesting, because the monks were told to generate an objective feeling of compassion during meditation. And then their brain activity began to fire in a rhythmic, coherent manner, and that suggested neuronal structures were firing in harmony. And that was observed at a frequency of 25 to 40 hertz, which was the rhythm of gamma waves. So there's a synchronous activity going on of the body mind bringing things together. Guess high attention states have been linked to gamma waves 30 to 80 hertz. And what was interesting is that these gamma bands oscillations in the monks' brains were signals that were the largest seen in humans, and conversely, the gamma waves band oscillations were scant in novice meditators. So this was not a phenomenon across the board. This was a phenomenon of meditation experienced monks. Though a number of the rhythmic signals did appear to strengthen in beginner meditators with further experience in the exercise, implying that the aptitude for one to produce gamma band rhythm is actually trainable. And that was a study by Lutz et al. That was fascinating, which then again relates back to these levels of consciousness. So increase in the levels of consciousness will increase possibly the levels of gamma produced in times of insight or perception. So there'll be physical changes. So here's a more detailed brainwave classification that I found that takes some of this into account. So there is these hyper gamma brain waves from 100 to 200 hertz. So this was under state of consciousness listed as extraordinary states of consciousness and spiritual development, possibly, I guess, because the research is not anywhere near done yet on this, which is why it's so fascinating. Anyways, so this would be exceptional information processing, compassion, and extraordinary focus, but a focus that takes into account the efferent information coming in from the body and body-mind. So here's the gamma 40 to 100 hertz listed as higher levels of cognitive ability and REM sleep. And I guess the other study said also deep sleep, so including that in there. So that would be active thought and peak concentration and states of intense focus and meditation, visualization, compassion, and so on. Which then, according to the other studies I'd looked at, if mixed together with beta for decision or closed focus, then alternates. So that is being awake and mentally alert with high levels of awareness and cognition integrates then these gamma insights. And here are the references. So this was a really interesting inquiry where I'm still curious is about understanding how more gamma waves change the physiology of the brain. So I'm interested in the transmutation process, meaning the reflection of higher states of consciousness in a physical form. So the electrical form, I guess, would be a bridge for that. And I found some things, but it wasn't clear to me yet how that could work. And I think it has something to do, of course, with how to measure brainwaves. So being able to put sensors inside the brain, I suppose, is more efficient than outside of it, but then that's an ethical issue. And maybe there are other methodologies that are going to come up in the future that would make this a lot easier. And is there anything else I would like to add? So yes, there was this Charles Schroeder, for a neuroscientist at Nathan S. Klein Institute for Psychiatric Research in Orangeburg, New York. And he and his colleagues were studying a different ebb and flow of oscillations. This one probably involves a host of different kinds of waves, including theta waves, and happens in the split second when your eyes dwell on a scene. So it's taking things in, but then I think the gamma waves kick in when you have an insight, or when possibly you have the sense of meta-awareness. So I think that's it. So thank you very much. And I need to stop the recording.